President Muhammadu Buhari to step down as the chairman of the ruling party's campaign council before the upcoming elections.
We are providing over 30 billion euros development assistance to the sub-Saharan Africa.
The European Union and the United States signed a memorandum of understanding that would boost energy and development in Africa.
The goal would be to go to Sharm el-Sheikh, which would be an African Cup with a unified message on where Africa stands when it comes to energy transition.
And the annual African Energy Week conference begins in Cape Town, South Africa this week. Those stories and more coming up on Nightline Africa. Concern Nigeria for the protection of human rights and rule of law, a political pressure group, is calling on President Muhammadu Buhari to step down as the chairman of the ruling party's campaign council. The group argues that the position of the outgoing president of the All Progressive Congress, or APC, represents a conflict of interest, which it also says undermines his promise to leave a legacy of free, fair and credible elections. Nigerians go to the polls in 4 months to choose local, state and federal representatives, including the president. The group says Buhari's position in the party means he will support and campaign for Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu, a former Lagos state governor and presidential candidate for the APC for the upcoming presidential vote in February. This, the group contends, will not ensure a level playing field for all the aspiring candidates seeking to take over from the president. But supporters say the group's concern is misplaced since the president is not the head of the Electoral Commission that organizes the elections. For more about the call for credible and impartial elections, I reached Deji Adeyanju. He is the convener for Concern Nigeria for the protection of human rights and rule of law.
It's a moral call because the president was not mandated to promise free, fair and credible elections. He voluntarily took the moral high ground to say he wants to conduct free and fair elections. So in the spirit of that moral pledge that he has made to the Nigerian people, it is inconceivable that he will also sit as chairperson of the APC campaign council, because the APC, they are determined to win. And if you look at their utterances, their actions and inactions, they have pointed only in one direction, victory or nothing else. So the president cannot be party to that campaign council, because that campaign council objective is to give victory to APC at all costs. The president, should wash his hands of partisan politics if he is to deliver credible elections.
But Deji, some people are suggesting that the president should be celebrated for promising to leave a legacy of free and fair and transparent elections, rather than being morally called upon to resign his position as the head of the APC.
Yeah, some people will always say, and whether we like it or not, the president in 2019 promised free and fair elections, but the elections were not free and fair. So and the president, his body language does not support that he has any plan whatsoever, to provide free and fair elections in the country. And that is why many of us are saying that the president must follow his commitment, his moral commitment through by resigning from that campaign council.
Some people are suggesting that by asking the moral question for the president to resign as head of the APC, basically is just a ceremonial head, and that the upcoming elections in February would determine who leads the party. So calling on the president to resign is neither here nor there, and it's inappropriate. How do you respond to that?
These people that are saying these things, they are politically naive, and many of them, in our view, the people who know politics is, because politics is what the critical stakeholders say it is. If the critical stakeholders refuse to play by the books, then there will be no free and fair or credible elections in the country. As the father of the nation, who nobody compelled him to voluntarily promise free and fair elections, it is the irreducible minimum. It's a given that he cannot be partisan in the election. He's not on the ballot. So he should leave a lasting legacy by, he should resign. He should not only resign his membership, he should ensure that the elections are free and credible.
But Deji, what do you say to those who are saying the outgoing president is not the chairman or the chairperson of the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, the only constitutionally mandated body to organize elections in the country? So why would his presence as the chairman of the ruling party and as an outgoing president have any effect on how the Electoral Commission administers elections in February? Because that is undermining the work of INEC's ability to organize credible elections in Nigeria. Your response to that?
Yes. Critical stakeholders in INEC will be looking at the body language of the president. Critical stakeholders in the police, in the army, in the SSS, all over. So every time that the president chairs the campaign council of the APC, the general assumption is that the president wants the APC to win. So, and these critical stakeholders, the political stakeholders in the country, they are the ones that determine whether elections will be free and credible or not. Whether INEC says that elections will be credible or not, INEC does not control the police. INEC does not control the army, the SSS. INEC does not even control the critical stakeholders in the country. INEC work is just to send its officers to polling units and make sure that they do not compromise. So it is the critical stakeholders that facilitate to make sure that there's peaceful election, like the police, the army, and all these people. They are the ones that the body language of the president is capable of influencing. And that is why the president needs to recuse himself from that campaign council, show probable cause, and convince the electorate and the Nigerian people and the critical stakeholders like the police, the SSS, the army, and everybody that he's not interested in the outcome of the general election to favor his political party.
Deji Adeyanju is the convener for Concern Nigeria for the Protection of Human Rights and Rule of Law. He spoke with me from the capital, Abuja. The European Union and the United States signed this week a memorandum of understanding that would boost energy and development in Africa. It comes as Jutta Urpilainen, the European Commissioner for International Partnerships, visits Washington. She's scheduled to meet U.S. government officials as well as attend the annual meetings of the World Bank and International Monetary Fund. The discussions during the visit focused on European Union efforts to improve global food security and international development. So far, the EU Commissioner met with the administrator of the U.S. Agency for International Development, Samantha Power. To learn more about the agreement signed between the EU and the U.S., I reached Jutta Urpilainen via Skype. Urpilainen's portfolio includes fostering EU partnerships to reduce global poverty and to support sustainable development. Here is the concluding part of the interview with the EU Commissioner. Commissioner Jutta, talk to me briefly about the European Union's development priorities in Africa, briefly.
Yes. Well, we are providing over 30 billion euros development assistance to the sub-Saharan Africa. So from the geographic perspective, that's our main priority because we see that the countries are most vulnerable and the need is very much, the aid is very much needed. 35% of our aid is somehow linked to the climate, so climate-related projects. 20% of our aid is for human development, which means that education, health, and social protection. 10% for digitalization, so for digital, and then the other 10% for migration. What I decided as a commissioner is that we are investing more in education and in young people. So we are now focusing on basic education, access to basic education, especially for girls in Africa, vocational education and training, because many young people are entering in the labor market in Africa, and also teacher training, because there is a huge lack of new teachers in Africa. I would say almost 20 million new teachers by the year 2030. So I decided to globally increase our financing to education from 7% to 13%. So it means that globally we are investing over 6 billion euros to education. So European Union is really globally a champion for education. And then investing in young people in Africa. 70% of the African citizens are under 30 years old. There are regions like Sahel where half of the population is under 15 years old. And we wanted to adopt last week a new youth action plan for European Union's external relations, through which we want to empower young people, for instance, through the education, but also engage with young people. And we have this Youth and Women Democracy Initiative, for instance, through which we provide 40 million euros assistance or funding to the different grassroots activities, where we want to also, provide opportunities for young people to participate. And then the third component of that action plan is connect. So create networks and exchange opportunities, for instance, to come to study to Europe, but also then work in Europe.
Now, Commissioner Yusta, before you go, I know the European Union has a global gateway as an investment strategy of about 300 billion. What does it entail, and what impact will that have on Africa?
Well, we have to remember that half of that 300 billion euros, so 150, is committed to Africa. So Africa is our geographic priority. And in Africa, of course, we want to accelerate a green transition, which means that we are investing in renewable energy, for instance, but in general also invest in biodiversity. We want to invest in green solutions. And in addition to that, we also want to invest in digital transition. So we are digitalizing different services in Africa. And in addition to that, like I said, we are also investing in human development, human capital, through the education, through the research, but also through healthcare. So I am very convinced that we are now at the stage where we have very concrete flagship projects for Africa under the umbrella of Global Gateway. And very soon we can start to deliver. So we can really start to see those projects implementing at the country level.
Yuta Ipelanian is the European Union Commissioner for International Partnerships. She spoke with me via Skype from Washington. The annual African Energy Week conference begins in Cape Town, South Africa this week. Organized by the African Energy Chamber, the 4-day meeting seeks to unite African energy stakeholders, drive industry development and growth, as well as promote Africa as the destination for focused events on the continent. Representatives of the African Energy say this year's event provides the platform for dialogue and networking that could vastly reduce Africa's energy needs by 2030. N.J. Martin Ayok is the executive chairman of the African Energy Chamber. I reached him by phone and asked him about his expectations and prospects of this year's conference.
Our expectations for the Africa Energy Week 2022, we call it From Cape to Cairo. African ministers, private sector, oil and gas industry, renewable industry, and all the energy players would be meeting in Cape Town, South Africa. And the goal would be to go to Sharm el-Sheikh, which would be an African Cup with a unified message on where Africa stands when it comes to energy transition and what a just energy transition. For Africa, it's not just an energy transition. It must be a just energy transition. And so we need to have that unified message So we call it going from Cape to Cairo. And I'm confident that we will reach a consensus on what would be Africa's position at COP27 when it comes to our natural resources.
How do you think Africa or African countries participating in this conference can strategically place themselves to benefit from this?
Number one, we have a lot of global investors from Australia, from Europe, from America, and also from the Middle East and other intra-African countries that are really going to look at investing in Africa together with our international partners. So there will be a big showcase of what available opportunities are there that we have, especially with power. Don't forget, 600 million Africans do not have access to electricity. 900 million do not have access to clean cooking technologies, most of them women. This is a time for us to take advantage of the technologies, the financial capabilities, and really provide solutions for everyday people. That's why we say making energy poverty history should be on the top of the agenda and on everything that we do.
So how do you think Africans can leverage its presence there for its interest to generate more power and ensure that power generation meets their local demands?
Number one, we speak with one voice. Number two, we create an enabling environment so that we drive more opportunities. Number three, we cut the red tape and open doors so that we close the gap where we've seen a big chokehold on financing. But number four, we work with our global partners, especially the United States of America, that, I would say Africa and America, they're like peanut butter and jelly. They go hand in hand together. So you work with these partners from America, and then you work on creating this gas, whether it is gas to power, whether it is renewables projects, because at the end of the day, we need to create jobs in Africa so that everyday young people don't have to try to cross the Mediterranean to Europe, but then have this opportunity. Those opportunities are here. We need to turn those opportunities into real issues, and that is what we're doing. And I think it's not going to be a pop shop. We are going to be having a signing ceremony where a lot of deals are going to be signed. I mean, a lot of deals going in. On day one, we'll sign a lot of deals, and so it will be a kickstart to say we're going to launch this, and we're talking to a new generation of Africans that want to develop things, working with the international parties. That's why we have 3,000 people coming from all across the world into the mother city, Cape Town. Yeah.
What's next for the African Energy Chamber after this summit?
After this summit, we go to work. We will not let anybody rest, whether you are leaders, whether you're businesses, and everything. We have been successful in putting up a 3.5 million person membership, the largest energy movement in the continent. But we have to hold ourselves responsible and accountable. The era where we are going to wait for foreign aid to solve our problems, the era where we're going to beg others to do that, it's no more. We need to act responsibly. We need to encourage free markets. We need to encourage limited government, good governance, individual liberty, rule of law. We need to be the drivers of that if we are going to have to see the Africa that we deserve. So right after Africa Energy Week, we get everybody on the road.
N.J. Martin Ayok is the executive chairman of the African Energy Chamber. He spoke with me from Cape Town, South Africa. The economy of sub-Saharan Africa is projected to grow by 3.6% in 2022, more than 1% less than last year. This is due to a worldwide slowdown, tighter financial conditions, and volatile commodity prices. According to the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, rising food and energy prices are striking at the region's most vulnerable, as the public debt and inflation are at levels that have not been witnessed recently. For VOA, Maureen Ojiambo reports from the Kenyan capital, Nairobi.
Economic activity in sub-Saharan Africa is expected to slow this year and remain relatively modest in 2023. According to the International Monetary Fund, IMF, the region's outlook remains uncertain. The crisis comes as the region just recovered from a prolonged pandemic, leaving authorities with their most difficult and unclear policy environment. Advisor and mission chief at IMF's Africa Department, Luke Ayod, said that the region is struggling to finance its debts as food prices skyrocket.
The region has been hit by three big shocks. One is a slowdown of the economy of all the rest of the world, the advanced economies, China. The second one is that there is a tightening of financing conditions in the region, so interest rates are going up everywhere in the world. And so for countries, it's really a problem because their access to international markets in some cases is more difficult, or some countries actually have lost access to international markets.
The IMF says late last year, the sub-Saharan Africa appeared to be on the strong path of recovery from the COVID pandemic. The progress, however, was interrupted by instability in global markets, putting pressures on policymakers in the region. Economist Ali Khan Sacho says he agrees with those who say the Sahel's economic slowdown is due to multiple crises that have slowed growth.
We had this splurge in borrowing, which preceded COVID, where African countries borrowed money during that phase of Disneyland economics when rates were very low, and now are unable essentially to pay back their debts or service those same debts. And then we've had the cost of living crisis, which has been accelerated by global uncertainty. Most African countries have not been growing faster than their population growth, so that means Africans on average have been worse off.
The findings show that the region's most dynamic and resilient economies are more diversified and do not rely solely on natural resources. They are expected to grow by 4.6% in 2022 compared to 3.3% in oil exporters and 3.1% in other resource-intensive countries. In Kenya, the economy had been predicted to grow by 5%, but this may not happen due to inflation, debt, and other economic pressures. The IMF says due to worldwide trends, inflation has increased faster than anticipated, reflecting increased prices for essential food and energy items, which comprise about 50% of the region's consumption basket. For sub-Saharan Africa, the cost of living has pushed millions of people into acute food insecurity, and this could bring down economic growth and undermine social and political stability. Reporting for VOA, I am Moreno Jimbo in Nairobi, Kenya.
For World Food Day this year, the theme is Leave No One Behind, but the day honoring world food supplies comes as food security is under threat. For VOA, Kutsai Vanavashi has more from the Zimbabwean capital, Harare.
World Hunger Hilfe is a German non-profit organization pushing for zero hunger by 2030 globally. In Zimbabwe, Regina Feint is the country director of World Hunger Hilfe, and she explains the importance of World Food Day.
We have a global problem of too many people not having enough to eat. Currently, we say that it's about 828 million people who are hungry. So these are the most recent dates, and unfortunately these numbers are increasing. 2-3 years ago we were at a better situation. We saw that the numbers were going down, but also because of the COVID pandemic, we see the numbers going up again. And it's not only COVID, it's also the climate change. We see conflicts in the world. This is all contributing to more and more people having not enough to eat.
David Marapira is Zimbabwe's Deputy Minister of Agriculture. He gave an update on Zimbabwe's food security situation.
The government notes with utmost concern that majority of our population is in dire state due to recurrent droughts, prolonged mid-season dry spells, and tropical cyclones experienced in the past season. The country experienced an erratic rainfall season, which saw normal to below normal rainfall being recorded in most parts of the country.
The COVID-19 pandemic affected many in the global village, and Zimbabwe was no exception. Francesca Edelman is World Food Programme Country Director in Zimbabwe. She says the pandemic is not the only challenge for the vulnerable.
The war in Ukraine is further dampening the economic prospects of developing countries, including Zimbabwe. Furthermore, access to affordable, nutritious food is increasingly difficult for vulnerable families who suffer the domino effects of all these challenges. In rural areas, following a below-average agricultural season, some 3.8 million people will not have enough cereal to eat between January and March 2023. In cities, rising prices have affected vulnerable dwellers that source their foods from market stands, street vendors, and farmers' markets. Only now prices are starting to stabilize. Yet many have already resorted to last recourse mechanisms such as reducing the number and quality of meals, taking loans, or selling productive assets.
As the effects of climate change become more evident, the call for climate change adaptation measures has grown louder. Finch says this is bearing fruit.
I think there are good developments. We can see that the number of hectares being cultivated with, for example, small grains is increasing. So small grains are much better adapted to drought situation. Also other crops like sunflowers are much better adapted.
Marapira says the government is working to ensure food security in the country. It has various programs such as irrigation schemes, fish farming, borehole drilling, startup stock for poultry, cattle and goats, as well as free farming inputs. The WFP, World Hunger Hilfe, and other development partners are pushing for climate-smart agriculture and supporting government programs through financing and technical skills. For VOA, this is Kudzai Zunawashe from Harare.